Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to be taking you through how I turned a sketch in the sketchbook into a digital illustration, and I'll put that on the screen for you, and how I like to blend my traditional and digital processes sometimes. And we'll start off straight away with the sketchbook. So we'll ignore these are studies. We'll just focus on this page. So it all started with this thumbnail here. I had an idea in my head, and this illustration is called The Veiled Lady because it's all inspired by the Veiled Lady mushroom. And we were doing a mushroom collab. I'm trying to remember exactly how this ended up starting. We were doing a collab that ended up inspiring me to do this, but I can't remember which collab it was. There was a mushroom collab, but I think that actually came after this came about. But regardless, I had mushrooms on my mind, and I was researching all sorts of different fungi, and I came across the Veiled Lady mushroom, which has like a veil growing off of it, and I ended up thinking up this. And I went through a bunch of references of dresses, of poses and different things, and I really loved this idea of a pose, so I wanted to take my idea out of my head on paper and be as rough with it as possible. And then I did a larger sketch of the idea, and all I did then was took a picture of this page and brought it into Clip Studio, which I will go through in a moment. But one way that I really like to blend my traditional and digital processes together is by having the sketching process and the ideation and the thumbnailing be traditional, and then I can take that really easily into digital just by scanning it or taking a photo of it. I don't have a scanner at the moment, so I just have to take a photo of it, but if you have a scanner, then by all means that's a much better way of doing it. But for the purpose of just using this as a rough sketch, I find pictures work just fine, because I'm not going to be having any of this in the final piece, as you'll see from the process. So let's move into the process. All I did with the picture as soon as I got into Clip Studio was reduce the opacity so that I could more easily see my line work on top. It's very similar to if I were to do my sketch digitally and then reduce the opacity, or if I was working traditionally to roll a kneaded eraser over the top of my sketch to just knock it back a bit so that I can more easily see the line work I'm going to be doing on top. So this is one of the easiest ways for me to integrate my traditional and digital processes together. I'll talk a little bit about why I want to do that, but first a little bit more about the process. I'm going in with some line art here straight away first, but I'm only focusing on the character and some of her costuming. I actually do the veil differently, so I don't do the veil with line art, I more paint the veil. And that was something that I wanted to do going into this. I knew that that was a distinction I wanted to make between the costuming of the character, some of it being lines and some of it being more painted. And then I went in with a background and then the colour flats. One of the ways I like to work digitally when I'm working with line and colour like this is to flat out the main different areas of the piece I'm working on so that I can not only mask them, but also to establish vague ideas of where main colour groups and hues and values are going to be. And then I'm just going to be playing around with brushes a little bit here. I wasn't sure what brush to use for the painting of the veil, and I played around with a couple different ones before settling on one, and I put in an idea of the general shape I was going for and then started laying in the shapes. I studied a lot of different examples of references of Veiled Lady mushrooms before going into this in order to understand how the webbing kind of works. One thing that I noticed was that the gaps are a lot smaller towards the top and the bottom and widened up a lot towards the middle, but there was always a lot of variety in the shapes and the sizes. And also the end tended to be quite ragged and stopping, almost like it was broken up. So that was something that I wanted to put into the final piece when I was just designing how the veil looked in this illustration. Once I had everything laid in, then I could start working on rendering and also building up texture as well, and also figuring out adjustments that I want to make to the hues I'm using and slight differences in value. I try to have the values down as early on as possible and then allow myself wiggle room when it comes to the exact hues and mood that I'm looking for with the colours. But I found that values are one of the most important things to get down early, otherwise I just end up getting lost in a piece. So that's what I always try and make sure I at least have a vague idea of going into it. One way that I loved building up texture in this later down the road is with some sort of colour pencil kind of brushes. Some brushes that enabled me to act almost like I was hatching and developing layers of colour pencil, which is something I love doing on top of watercolour traditionally. So again, there's that element of mixing my traditional process and my digital process together, but still having a very digital feel to it, because one thing I'm trying to experiment with is how I can integrate different aspects into all the different mediums I'm using, but also still have the unique voice and language of that medium that I'm using at the time, because each medium is like its own language. There's going to be ways I speak through each language, but it is going to have its own vibe, and that's something that I'm not wanting to try and make it something that it's not. I'm not trying to make digital traditional, I'm still trying to work with it as a digital medium, but I'm finding ways that I can still speak by being myself, by still having me through it, if that makes sense. And that's something that I'm wanting to integrate, because I love certain aspects of traditional and I don't want to lose that when I'm working digitally. I want to be able to take advantage of digital art and take advantage of the unique qualities of it, but also still be myself and still have aspects I enjoy included in it. And one of the things I love is sketching traditionally. I love the feel of pencil on paper, and that's one reason why I like to sometimes do the ideation work traditionally and then take that into digital for a digital illustration. It's just something that allows me to still have the things I enjoy, but still be able to work digitally. Another thing is the textures that I like. Some of the textures that I enjoy traditionally, like I mentioned, the colour pencil textures that I really get involved with on the top of her mushroom hat and also on the skirt of her dress. Those are aspects that I really love traditionally, and I've also found I love digitally too. But there's also things that I enjoy traditionally and things that I enjoy digitally with various mediums that I only really love with that one medium. So it's about experimenting and finding things that I carry on through multiple mediums and maybe only use for one medium. And that's how I'm integrating things at the moment. It's a mixture of figuring out aspects of the process I enjoy and where I enjoy doing it, and also figuring out things like textures and what I like using where. I have also taken this idea and flipped it on its head recently as well, where I've tried to do the ideation and sketching phase, and sometimes also coming up with the colours that I want to use on a sketch digitally to then do a traditional illustration, just to figure out what I like doing in my process. I do definitely enjoy having a traditional element to my digital illustrations though, by having these traditional sketches. We're back in the non-digital world now to look at what I have wrapped up in here, which are some Giggly prints of that illustration. So I went from traditional to digital to a physical. Because I haven't used the printer before and I didn't know how my digital files would come out in a physical product, I decided to do a limited run, so I only did a few prints to get an understanding of things that I would keep, things that I would change, and I wrote down everything that I did to the file to prepare it for print so that I could then cross-reference what I did with the finished prints when they arrived. I changed the file to a CMYK profile. So on Clip Studio you can preview a few different CMYK profiles, and rather than sending in your file in RGB, so that's a big learning curve as well when you're trying to make files ready for print, is CMYK profiles and RGB. The printer that I used for the Giggly prints does say that you can send in files still in the RGB format because of the amount of inks that they use. It's supposed to still be very similar to how your piece looks in RGB, but I decided to send it in a CMYK format just so that I can give myself that practice. This is a slightly different subject to the rest of this video, which was mainly about how I like to blend my traditional and digital practices together, but I thought I'd give you a little insight into what I'm currently doing with making digital pieces into physical items as well, so we're going physical, digital, physical. This is a learning curve, so I thought I'd take you along with me a little bit in my journey of figuring all of this out. Thank you for joining me while I talk through my traditional and digital art process. I hope that it was interesting to some of you. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Also let me know what you've been up to lately in your art practice, and I will see you next time. Bye!